National Guidelines for Workers to Create Social and Sexual Safety for and with People with Disability are a broad framework for all workers to learn how to create and grow cultures of safety for people with disability. After all of these discussions, we found that there are 6 core concepts, all called core parts in our framework, and they are all centered around this concept of me and you. So, me in this concept refers to the person with disability, whereas you is talking about any worker that interacts or has a relationship with them as the person with disability. Obviously, workers in this group include a huge variety of different roles, responsibilities, and levels of connection to the person with disability, which is why we wanted to let you know that there will be industry specific versions of the guidelines coming. However, this current and fabulous version is a broader document that details all of the information that we heard from the disability community when we spoke to them. As such, not everything in this version of the guidelines will be applicable to every worker and every workplace. This version is, however, our base framework and provides the starting point for all of the other versions to go from there. The name iStart itself is actually an acronym, so it's used to help remember all of the 6 parts, and these are include, space, talk, access, respond, and time. Now, we decided on 2 versions because after much consultation with our project advisory group and looking at many different design options, we realised that there was no singular fixed way to visually show that the tool made sense to everybody and would work for everybody. As with all things in the disability space, accessibility is nuanced and individualised in many cases. Obviously, we've made decisions about some core access features, so that looks at things like color contrast, the use of white space, and the text size. But from there, we really wanted to be able to reach as many people as possible. So we landed on these 2 designs to really show the iStart tool in all its glory and make sure that it is as accessible to as many people as possible. The goal of the iStart tool is to provide awareness and understanding about sexual health, consent, respectful relationships, and social and sexual safety. They do this by bringing attention to each key part and then explaining how this part contributes to safety, before then providing a series of questions and prompts for organisations and workers to reflect on if they are meeting the safety standards and considerations of each part of safety. Importantly, there are also questions for people with disability to use, where they can then check that they are having their right to safety met. These questions and the iStart tool as a whole can then be used to help them advocate for themselves and request changes where they want and need them. The human rights aspect of the guidelines, explicitly the use of the human rights model of disability as the foundation of our work, is pivotal. All of our iStart parts and every tool or resource found within the document springs from the 4 concepts found within the human rights model of disability. From this underpinning, we then listened to the voices of the disability community, collaborated with our project advisory group, and ended up with the document that we have now in its co-designed model. As well as the iStart tool within the guidelines also provide some guiding principles and other resources for you to use within your organisation or for self-advocacy checks. As I mentioned earlier on, the guidelines are for people with disability as well as workers and organisations. And this is really important because whilst the guidelines are not legally binding or enforceable, they are there for everybody to look at, learn from, and use to create better safety. The current version of the guidelines are written in plain English, but it's still a really dense and heavily worded document, which means it's going to be inaccessible to some people. To help overcome these barriers and try and make it truly accessible to as many people with disability as possible, we're also working on more accessible formats of the guidelines. We're hoping to create some videos to explain the iStart tool, and I'm currently in the process of writing the iStart tool into an easy read book for people to use. Now, this version is not ready yet, and that's important to say because it's in the draft phase and will need to be heavily consulted on with people with a disability to check that it is accessible, that it makes sense, and that the information is conveyed as easily as possible. However, I want to share a little snippet with you now just to give you a taste of what I have been working on. So, as you can see, this is the start of a chapter on the screen. This chapter looks at the very basics of what the iStart tool is. It's got some of the core features of Easy Read, so there's plentiful white space, there's not too much text per page, and as you can see, the first time a hard word is used, it's red, it's bolded, and then explained underneath. The 6 parts and their overview images are then shown before we flag that the original iStart tool image is going to be on the next page. From there, we move on to the central item of me and you, where importantly, we define what type of relationships we're talking about.
We are so excited about what these new versions of the guidelines and the continuing work on the guidelines are going to do to help improve accessibility, social, and sexual safety. We hope that to have the easy read versions of the guidelines finished in early 2025, so please keep an eye out for further announcements.